Welcome to Red and April Off-Grid. Join us as we build our off-the-grid passive energy dream home in the Arizona desert. This week we're putting in some accent features in the living room, installing a radon system in the bedroom, and finally getting started on those earthen floors. As part of the industrial modern look that we're going for, we wanted to bring some elements that you normally only see on the outside inside, and so that's why we have the raw concrete and some exposed woodwork, some exposed studs, and we also wanted to bring in some raw metal and use that as an accent in the living room. This worked out really well because we had some material left over from our original order from Mueller when I ordered all the metal for the outside of the house. I ordered quite a bit too much of this galvalume. Now all the other colored metal that I ordered barely enough of. In fact, almost got myself in a lot of trouble by not ordering enough, but ended up having just barely enough, used every full piece of the colored sheets. But this corrugated metal, this galvalume, we had some extra pieces of. I have no idea why I ordered so many, but ended up with enough to do some accent walls, and so we decided to use them in the living room. At first we weren't sure exactly where all we wanted to use it, but we decided it might look nice to go above and below the window, kind of from floor to ceiling, aligned with the window with this metal. And so that's what we decided to do, and just put it up and see how it looks, and we could always remove it later, but we were pretty convinced that this would work for us. We put both of our sets of scaffolding out front to make a nice workbench here for these panels, and so this is working out really well. Just put them on there and cut them to length. And so I have to cut two pieces for each window to cover the full width. And here you can see I'm having to remove some red marker. I used a marker to mark the line, and that was a mistake because ended up leaving some of the marker on the metal, and it shows. And so, because this is the side that'll go up against the roof. So anyway, had to remove that, and now I'm buttoning it up, putting it in place. I'm using these same screws to attach this on the inside as I used on the outside. There again, kind of bringing in the outside look inside. So those are a washered sheet metal screw that's roughly the same color as these galvalume panels. So I'm attaching it with that above and below. I'm using a scrap piece of 2x6 that I've just screwed onto the windowsill as a guide of how to fit this metal in. I want it fitting up in nice and tight, and I want it coming right up to the bottom of the windowsill. And this guide helps me get it, perfectly aligned with and flush with the windowsill. Later I'll come back in with a nice wood windowsill, and they should mate up and without a crack there and be nice and even. I might mention too what we were going for here with this design element with the color and the metal. So the gray on this wall makes this wall come closer to you, and it also makes it visually shorter, which normally you wouldn't want for your high side wall with all the windows. But once we come in with this metal, the metal going from floor to ceiling makes the wall look taller again, and it draws your eyes to the window. So we found that, and that's kind of what we're going for. What we find with this metal and the color of the wall, it brings the windows closer to you and draws your eyes to the windows. I used the factory edge of another piece to mark along the corrugated section, and this particular piece is for the smaller window in the living room, which doesn't require the full width of the sheet, and so I actually have to cut a part of this sheet off, and I'm trying to be as careful and do this as accurately as possible because all these cuts are going to show. And now I'm cutting it to width. I'm using my nibbler once again. This is an awesome tool. I love this thing. Trying to get a good straight line. And here you can see me installing it on that small window. Like I say, all these cuts are exposed. You can see them. And I'm trying to be as precise as possible here. Like this piece goes up against the ceiling, and there's not going to be any trim or anything up there. So I want it fitting as nice and tight as possible. It ended up working really good. It's got a nice tight fit. Comes up nice and flush against the sill. So I think this is going to work out great. The sides of these windows are finished out in drywall, but I will be using wood to make a sill for the top and bottom. So it'll be matching top and bottom going up to the tin on these windows. I think it'll look real nice. And we're going to be using some nice salvage material that we actually got at a thrift store back in Texas almost for free. And it's really cool solid oak that was from a bunk bed. I'm putting a lot of screws in here, way more than needed definitely, but we like the looks of the screws too. It's all part of the industrial look. And so this is coming together really well. Kind of step back here and look at this real quick. We're loving how this is look. We love how it goes with the concrete walls. It's all starting to come together. While we were eating lunch that day, we had some crazy excitement. Turns out there was this huge cop chase that ended at our place with somebody crashing through our fence and slamming into a tree. Fortunately, the police apprehended the perpetrators, but it ended up taking the rest of our afternoon dealing with it. We had to go put our fence back up. It was quite a crazy afternoon. Back to the build. In my spare time, I've been working on light and outlet covers, just going around the house and putting those on. It makes a big difference and it's very satisfying to do. Well, we're finally ready to get started on the floors. We're going to get started in the master bedroom, and before we can really get going, I need to put in a radon system because that's going to go in all of that gravel. Before we cover it up, I've got to get it installed. I'm using 1.5" PVC pipe here, and I'm drilling 5/16 holes in it, about every foot, drilling through both sides. I'll also drill it through the end cap. And so I'm just creating basically a gathering system, just in case there's radon gas that comes up through the floor. And so the idea is that it would come up through the floor, permeate through the gravel, eventually find this pipe, migrate into the pipe, and then this pipe will eventually lead out of the house. This isn't a professional radon system. It probably doesn't meet any kind of specs, and we're not even sure we have radon. We probably don't, but we wanted to put something in just in case, with the idea that something would be better than nothing, and we think this will be effective. With that done, it was time to level the gravel, just rake it and then tamp it down, try to get it as level as possible and also compacted. So I'm working that, just kind of slowly tamping across the room, trying to get it as level and packed down as I can. With that flat, it was time to start putting down the layers. We're using the same layering on this that we did underneath the concrete that we poured kind of in the other part of the house. So we're putting down a layer of this house wrap. We just happen to have an extra piece. We may not use this through all of the rest of the floors. And then we're putting plastic over that. We're using the heaviest mill plastic that we could find locally. We would have liked a little bit thicker though, and that's why we put the house wrap down first. This is all really overkill because this foam that we're putting down next also acts as a vapor barrier. So we have like 3 vapor barriers under this. But anyway, it ought to work well and keep the vapor out. This is 1-inch foam board that we're using. We're just cutting it. It goes right up to the walls, and then we're taping the joints.
So exciting stuff here. It's Monday, August 8th. We're about to start doing our earth floors. We have no idea what we're doing. We're doing kind of a rammed earth since we already have all this cement, so we'll see how that goes.
I had to go get the tamper from our son, so here's a quick look at his place. It's coming along real nice. It was delayed a little bit with the weather, and so we have a little time to use the tamper while he's not using it. April went up and got the sifter from our daughter. She used it to do the earthen floors in her house, and they turned out great, and it's a nice sifter. It'll save us from having to build another one. The sifter did need just a little bit of repair and reinforcement. I needed to reattach the screen around the edge a little bit. I also put in a center board to support the center of the screen, since we were going to be giving it some pretty heavy use. And then also when she was using it, she just leaned it against a tree or a set of sawhorses or something like that, and that was working out fine for her. But where we're going to be using it, I needed it to have its own legs so we don't have to prop it up against something. And so I'll be building some legs. Here I am putting those on and getting those ready. I just used some scrap lumber to make these legs, some stuff that we had lying around, and I made them in such a way that they're adjustable. You have the leg that's coming off and pivots on the screw up top, and then it has a support leg that's adjustable, and you can, by moving it up and down the side, you can adjust the height. Next thing, I just gathered up some scrap materials in order to make a ramp or a pathway that the wheelbarrow will follow into the room so that I'm not going across that gravel. Here we're using one of the forms that we used off the concrete wall as part of that pathway. So that worked out really well. The other form, if you recall, I had already disassembled it to salvage some of the 2x4s off of it. And so now we're using that piece of plywood to make a ramp to get up the front porch. I had to cut it in half to make 2 shorter ramps, one that gets up to the top of the concrete pad itself and the other one that goes from the concrete pad and over the lip into the house. This is really good heavy-duty wood and is perfect for these ramps. And here you can see we're just using some other scrap pieces to go wherever we want to in the room. We can move these around to kind of change the path as we're bringing in different loads and pouring it in different places. And here you can see April's starting to cover the bottom of the wall with plastic. It's time to start gathering everything up and getting ready to process this dirt. So we're moving the sifter into place. We're going to be putting some boards underneath so that the sifted dirt falls on the boards and it's easy to scrape off into buckets. As you can see, we positioned it by this dirt pile, and this dirt pile we actually put here when we had the backhoe here last summer. When we were excavating the pond, we put 3 piles of dirt kind of around the corners of the house that we plan to use for this earthen floor. So a little pre-thought there, worked out good. And so now we have kind of a staging station where we'll be collecting and sifting our dirt. We brought the cement mixer over and we're getting started on the first batch. We've just put in our dirt and our sand and our cement and we're starting to mix it all together. We're adding water here, looking at it. We keep kind of stopping it and feeling it. We'll compress some of it in our hand and see what kind of a clump it makes, check it out, and decide to put some more water in. We really don't know what we're doing here. And we're just learning as we go, and you can see that we're trying to figure it out here. We think this is about right, and we're going to take it in and try it. We're going to try to do a rammed earth concept, so try to not get it muddy, have a minimal amount of moisture in there, and then compact it just like you would do with rammed earth. So that's why we have the tamper. And so we're bringing it in. You can see it's still fairly dry, definitely not muddy. We're moving it into place here, trying to just get it kind of squared off and built up. We're going to be doing this about 3 to 4 inches thick. So it'll be a fairly good base, and here I am just compacting it down. This batch compacted down nicely, but we think we may have got it a little bit too wet. It was kind of forming balls and looked a little funny, so we decided this next batch to do a little less water. You can see in the background there's 2 piles right next to each other that we're pulling off of. One is the dirt pile and the other is the sand pile. That sand we actually ordered when we were doing the concrete floors in the house. We had ran out of the sand from the pond and we needed to order some for the concrete, and while we were at it, we decided to also order some extra because we knew we would need it when we did these earthen floors. We decided to use a board to help us get this level, and this board is spaced such that it leaves it about an inch high. We found that it compresses about an inch when we compact it with this tamper, and so that board helps us keep it level. We go over it when it's freshly poured, and it leaves a surface that's about an inch high, and then we compress it. It's down to the level we want. The ratio we're using in mixing here is 5 gallons of sifted soil, 5 gallons of mortar sand, and 1 gallon of cement. We just dump all of that in and let it mix for a while so all the dries get mixed up together, and then we spray in the water and start wetting it down. It's really hard to know when it's wet enough. We're trying to keep it pretty dry with the idea that, as long as it has enough moisture to compact, that's what we want. But we don't want a lot of extra moisture because we're thinking that extra moisture could cause cracking as it dries. So we're trying to get it as dry as possible, but still, to where it'll compact and compress once we tamp it. We got going on this, and we probably should have done some test samples before we actually started putting the floor down. But I like to just wing things and wanted to get started, and we'd watched a bunch of videos on it, and it seemed like everyone does it a different way, and it kind of depends on your soil, and so we just decided to go for it. It was mostly my idea. It's kind of my personality to just get in there and do it, and then I figure I can always make it work, make some minor adjustments along the way, or worst case, come back and redo it, but usually I figure I can make it work one way or the other. We had originally intended when we started today to just do, a few batches. Just do a nice corner and then wait a day or two and see how it looked. But man, this seemed to be going along great. I was into the process and it seemed like it was working out fine. I just, had a feeling that this was all good. And so we decided to keep going with it. And so we're going. We're going across the room, and we ended up getting quite a bit done today. As we go along here, we're doing our best to keep this kind of level and flat. Our main thing is that we don't want it to be too high. A little low is better than too high. And so we're trying to keep it level. We've been using that board, and how the board works is I have a little spacer on the end of the board that sets it up an inch off of the whatever we set it on, and we're setting it on the concrete rail. You can see along the edge of the wall there's a concrete lip that sticks out about 4 inches. That's actually part of the footer of the house, and the footer is extra wide because we had originally planned it for an aircrete home, and so we ended up with that about 4 inches of concrete lip there, and that's what we're trying to go even with. Eventually the floor will be even with that concrete ledge, and so anyway I can use that as a frame of reference to set the board on. We're actually trying to compact it to where it's about a ½ inch below that ledge, with the idea that we want to save room for the top coat. We want to come back in later and do the top coat, which would be kind of the nice, finished, pretty surface, and we want that to be at least a ½ inch thick and up to an inch. This base coat that we're putting in is pretty thick. It's about 3½ inches thick, and we just wanted it to be a good, solid mass to put the top coat on. It just needs to be firm and solid, and we don't want it to compress or move or crack any more than we have to. So we're trying to get it dry, but wondering here if it's a little too dry. You can see the way this tamper is working. This is looking pretty dry to us, and we're wondering here if we have the moisture content right. We really, like I say, we really don't know what we're doing. And we're definitely questioning here whether or not we have enough moisture in this. But it does kind of look like, the rammed earth stuff we've seen. That's kind of what we're going for, is a rammed earth concept. And this looks kind of like rammed earth, so we're thinking maybe this is just about right. We love the monsoon season here. As you can see, it's clouding up. It clouds up almost every afternoon, and it blocks the sun and lowers the afternoon temperatures. Really makes it nicer to work outside here. It also really greens up the landscape. This is really our springtime here in the desert, is when this monsoon hits. And so it's a great time to be working outside and doing this stuff. It's a nice time of year. We're getting started on our last batch of the day here. We've finished almost half of the room. For this last batch, we decided to use more moisture. The other batches, we were worried they might be a little bit dry, and so we thought, well, for this last batch, let's get it a little wetter and see how that goes, and then we can compare tomorrow after it dries a little bit and see how they look. Bringing in the last batch now, and we are generally encouraged at how this is going. One day's work, we've got over half of it done, actually just a partial day, and we're making a lot of progress, just a little cleanup, and we're curious to see how it looks tomorrow. Yesterday we put down our first batch of earth here. We actually did several batches, but these are all the same mixture. So we're using the same ratios here, but you can see a pretty big difference. This was the first one that we put down, and it's really hard. You can see when you try to rub it, it doesn't do much. It's really hard and solid, and it doesn't come off easy. It doesn't flake easy. This is the last batch we did in the day, and it's also pretty good. It's quite hard on the surface and doesn't want to come off when you rub it too much. So that's not too bad. The only difference in these layers is the amount of water we put in. So this was probably the most water, and this was kind of medium water. And then you can move down here just a little bit, and you can see we were putting a lot less water in here. And it's actually not as hard, and it really abrades easy. We're going to have to come back in and wet this down and repack it a little bit. And so what we've learned is that the mixture is fine. We just need to add more water. So that's what we'll do today. This sifter is working great here. It's just an expanded metal screen, a pretty fine expanded metal screen, probably 1/4 inch openings or so. It was a little too steep. The dirt was rolling off before it had time to really go through the sifter. And so I was able to just adjust it by unscrewing my screw on one side, pulling it out and re-screwing it in. These legs are really working out well. So I just lowered a little bit in hopes that this lower angle will give the sand more time. And as you can see there, it seems to be working really well. It's just got more time on the sifter for it to fall through and actually sift. So I think I got it at just about the right angle, and just getting ready for another day.
So we're getting ready to start our second day of earth floors. So here we are in the master bedroom. We made pretty good progress yesterday. We have a couple of hours before lunch, so we'll see how much we can get done. So we're going to wet this down and see if that hardens it up.
Before we get started with new batches, we're watering this and trying to repack it down. It was really crumbly, and so we're hoping, have high hopes that by adding some moisture to this and walking all over it and compacting it some more, that it'll go ahead and harden up and won't be so crumbly. Hopefully this will work, and this sectional floor will work out good, but the next batches we'll be doing wetter. It is a little worrisome how much water this is taking though. April's watering this, and it just keeps absorbing it. We'll see how it goes. Well, we're ready to get started. Just firing up the mixer here, and this shows a little bit about the process. So I have 1 bucket of sifted soil here, so that's 5 gallons of dirt that I'm putting in first. I'm going to dump that in and let it go for just a second while I grab a bucket of cement. We have the cement that we bought way back when, and we've had sitting on the property, so this was stuff that needed to be used anyway, and so we're adding it and hoping that'll work well to compact with. Then I put in the 5-gallon bucket full of our mortar sand, and we just let those dries mix for a little bit until they appear to be thoroughly mixed. And then we add the water. This is the part that's kind of hard, knowing how much water to add and trying to get it to just the right consistency. We're still stopping and checking every once in a while, squeeze it and see how it forms, see how it's compacting. We want to get it at least as wet as that last batch that we did yesterday, because that one seemed to turn out really solid. And so we want it that wet or wetter, but we're still worried about going too wet because we don't want it to crack. We know we have a lot of clay in the soil, and we're worried about cracking. And so far what we've done hasn't cracked, so we like that. So we're really trying to walk a tight line here to get it wet, but not too wet. Well, this mix is looking pretty good. You can get a good look at the texture there. This feels about like that last batch that we did yesterday, which turned out great, so we're confident that this is wet enough. As long as we can maintain this level of moisture, we think we'll be okay. Well, we're starting to get into a rhythm and get a little routine going. I'll bring it in, wheel it in the wheelbarrow, dump it out. April gets down and kind of smooths it all around and gets it ready for the tamper. I come back in with the tamper, tamp it down, and with her help get it level, try to put a level on it sometimes or just eyeball it sometimes, but trying to keep level across the room. April will then kind of finish it up, compact the sides a little bit, and we repeat the process. We're also starting to get a feel for how long this whole process is going to take. It looks like it's going to be maybe 2 or 3 hours of good solid work to do half of a room. So if you were to put in one really long day, you could probably get a whole room done, although it's a whole lot of work. By the time you sift all the soil and lug it all around and do the compaction and stuff, I don't know that we'd want to put in a full day doing this kind of work just because it's hard on the body, but it actually still seems like it's going to go pretty quickly. Just working on tamping down this batch. We did find that if we get the batch a little wetter than usual, that it starts to stick to the tamper pretty bad, which is kind of annoying. You have to clean the tamper off every so often, but it's not too bad, and it seems to be working out okay. All of these ramps and walkways are also working out really well. You can take it right where you want it and don't have to worry about the wheel of the wheelbarrow getting stuck in anything. All that's working out well. Well, it's afternoon and the clouds are starting to build up in the sky, and we're about to get some shade here. The shade helps so much when you're working outside here. When the sun hits you directly, it's really hot, but as soon as a cloud comes across the sun and blocks that sun, it cools off dramatically, and it's so nice. The only thing bad about the clouds is that they also bring rain, and that can be a problem for us since we have cement sitting out and stuff, so we'll have to stop if it starts raining. And here we are mixing up our last batch for the day and putting it in. We're just going to the doorway here, flattening that all out and getting ready to compact it. We also found that you can walk on it right away. Just as soon as it's packed down, you can walk on it immediately, which is something we were a little worried about at first, that we would have to stay off of it for a while, but there doesn't seem to be any need for that at all. Well, that finishes up the first room. We're glad to have it done, and so far it's looking excellent.